Okay, it's Chris Medina. I'm recording now. And what title are we using for this story?
Oh, sorry, you were asking me?
Yeah, what title do you use when I'm sure I know you have another job title, but what title do I?
Um, for this, I guess we'll say
Your hemisphere.
collector and collector and historian on
Okay,
Hemisphere 68,
okay.
um,
Collector,
or
historian.
curator
Mm.
curator of World's Fair 68.info, or
Well, I can slip in, yeah, but for what? Because I saw you quoted in the paper, so it looks like it said collector and historian for Hemisphere 68. How about that?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I think that'd be fine. Yeah, I
Oh,
think one or two articles did that before.
yeah. Okay. Now, so I'm sure you've been following the news about the Texas Pavilion. It's pretty much said and done. So the main gist of my article is talking to Louis Vetter at Conservation Society about their loss in court to stop
Hmm.
them from to stop UTSA and the city from demolishing it, but they've done it already. So it's all, and
Yeah.
they've lost the injunction, and so that's it. What are your feelings about it as we are talking about hemisphere history here?
Well, I think from an architectural and World's Fair history standpoint, it's sad to lose another piece of mid-century mile-style architecture, as well as World's Fair history. Um, because it was common with most World Expos is that after the fairs have gone, a lot of the buildings are torn down because obviously they're built as temporary. But if you look at other World's Fair sites from that time period, being like New York City that did 64, 65, Montreal did 67, see here, see Knoxville, Tennessee did 82, and New Orleans did 84, for example. You look at the sites that were developed for the World Expo, there's very little visual markers or remnants there to tell
Mm.
you the story of what that was. And unfortunately, with the loss of the state of Texas Pavilion, um, we're starting to get more into that I guess realm where
Mm.
it's being lost to history.
Yeah, because Hemisphere was the most transformative event of San Antonio's time on this planet, and
Mm-hmm.
and you know that's the problem with life is that the next generation, next and so on, and history recedes. But you know, it is that's why Europe looks so good because they preserve their old buildings and so they don't lose their history. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so Hemisphere was very important to San Antonio. Could you talk about that?
Well, yes. The idea was first touted around in the early 1960s. Because if you look back in history, prior to the Great Depression, San Antonio was the most prominent city in the region. If you go back to Mexico and Spanish colonial days, San Antonio there was the capital of North Mexico, for example.
Mm.
Um, and you look at some of the iconic buildings in the downtown area, like my alma mater, Jefferson High School, came in. It was
Yeah.
opened in 32, for example, but all the budgets and everything were passed in 29 prior to the crash. And then you look at like the Aztec, the Majestic, Empire theaters, for example, they were all built in the 1920s during the booming times. But then through the Great Depression and then World War II, Dallas and Houston became prominent. Dallas for oil and cattle ranching, the railroads for the Midwest. Houston for oil and shipping as well. So San Antonio fell into a backwater.
Mm.
That on top of the then popular trend, but it's 1950s for people to move out of the downtown areas into the suburban neighborhoods. That became a trend.
Yeah.
So in the early 1960s, the downtown area was kind of getting worn down and showing its age a bit because it wasn't being kept up with the times.
Yeah, I remember
Uh,
my dad, who's from here, said that the Riverwalk was downright dangerous before the fair came.
yes,
Hmm.
yes. Prior, yeah, even during the time of Hemisphere, this is before the I guess you want to call it the Great Awakening of the redevelopment of the Riverwalk, which hadn't really seen anything since A.H. Hugman did his work in the 1930s. The military actually had standing orders: no active duty personnel on river level after sunset.
Wow. That's really,
anyway, back to your question.
Yeah.
So 1960s came around, and movers and shakers started to come up with, well, what can we do to revitalize the downtown area and to put the city of San Antonio back on the map?
Yeah.
And that's where they came up with, first it was the idea of a trade fair, since San Antonio was and still is referred to as the gateway to Latin America. But, just to, promote San Antonio and bring it back to, activity and revitalize the downtown area. And then it was Henry B. Gonzalez, who was elected to Congress in '62. He coined an idea for the 20th century plan for the 20th District of Texas, which was the downtown area. And then that's where they came up with the idea for the feasibility study. It says, okay, well, Seattle had just finished their World's Fair the year before in '62. They called it Century 21 Exposition. And it came back and redeveloped their part of the downtown area. It left, I don't know how many millions of dollars in the city's coffers, and left them with millions of dollars of new infrastructure and buildings to use. So then that's when the idea came around. So, okay, let's do that. I mean, they took it a whole different ideas, but that's the one that took on the most traction. And then how they ended up on that site where Hemisphere is today, they actually had a few other sites to choose from. I know one company was offering 200 acres on the south side. The prominent residential builder, Ray Ellison Enterprises, they actually were offering like 1,300 acres out by where the Missions Ballpark is off of Highway 90 out there by Fort San Antonio. But then they chose the site there, the original neighborhood, because that way the study came back and said, okay, well, it's going to put you close to existing hotels, which have been like the Crockett, the Gunter, the Manger, for example. Plus, it's, if you want to do this for a tourism restart, that puts you within a stone's throw of your Alamo.
It couldn't have been anywhere else. It would have been a flop. So yes.
So that's how they chose that neighborhood. And that was the whole idea. And that's how they coined. Back in the '60s, it was popular for U.S. cities that held the expo, like New York and Montreal, for example, to put the event around a certain celebration. So New York did their '64 World's Fair around the 300th anniversary of the founding of New York City. Montreal, Canada did their Expo '67 around the 100th anniversary of independence, the Confederation Articles of creating Canada. So for '68, for us, it was the 250th anniversary of our city's founding back in 1718.
Yeah, wow. All that tremendous effort and care sort of bulldozed in a minute, i.e. the pavilion. And that's so, you're much younger than the fair and all of that, yet you care so much about it anyway. So you must be someone who cares about history and realizes its value.
Yes, because that's how I got into the interest of what Hemisphere was 19 years ago. Was my first job was at City of San Antonio when I was back in high school. So I've always had since then I've had a big affinity for theme parks. And originally when I went to college, I wanted to become an architect. So I actually have a drafting degree, but then I found that I got bit by the aviation bug and went that route instead. But I still love looking at architecture. I still love the history of it. And so those two interests kind of came together back in 2006 when I started learning. Okay, well, after I saw Marlene Richardson's documentary, which is part of the San Antonio Remembered series, that was episode 3 called Hemisphere. So, okay, so this kind of was a 6-month-long theme park. And then it perked my interest in looking at the architectural style of the fair, which was mid-century modern style. And then in relation to other world expos like Seattle, which is more futuristic, kind of like the Jetsons.
Yeah.
There was a century. called the Century 21 Exposition. So that's learning about the history of different World's fairs and styles and themes.
Wow.
And then just kind of took on a life of its own after that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just FYI, the local architectural group in town just sent me a notice, which I'll attend Thursday night. Is an architectural historian speaking about concrete. Did you know that?
Oh, yes. It's partially to be sponsored by Conservation Society and OHP. Yes, it's be out at Trinity University.
Yeah.
And going to talk about Cernan and Garza's design for the Palacio.
Yeah.
Rio,
I just mentioned it because I want to make sure you know, because I'm going to go over there and talk to this man, Mr. Fox, about the pavilion as well. So yeah, so well, if you could, being a native of San Antonio, we've got so many newcomers who move in here who don't know the history, and I'm not sure they really do care because there's so much development going on, and I think that's that's what everybody cares about now is development.
Right.
History notwithstanding. So, what about us natives who have affection for these old buildings? What would you say for us?
As far as to the...
Well, about seeing our heritage just, bulldozed down like that. I mean, these places are reminders to many people of, their kidhood and what San Antonio means and all of that. And also the Institute is not going to be the same wandering into that Frost building. I'm not sure it's going to feel the same, but I don't know.
No, my impression is that it's gonna change. It's gonna be very scaled back.
Yeah.
To the point to where I remember a few years ago when UTSA started putting out that commission, I think it was called ITC 2068.
Yeah.
Come up with new ideas. That's when I started noticing that when they would put out a press release every now and then, they started separating the entity from the building. Because I know before then, anybody would talk about the Institute of Arts and Cultures or go down to the ITC, the museum and the building were one and the same. But when the commission started putting out press releases, that's when they started saying, okay, well, we're talking about the future of the Institute of Arts and Cultures as an entity, but the building started being referred to as the Texas State's Pavilion. So that's where I started seeing a separation.
Yeah, I see your point. It's sort of insidious. Huh?
Yeah. Now, I mean, so I kind of knew about this. I kind of picked up on this for quite some time.
Yeah, I
I
see.
think from a historical standpoint, it's kind of sad to see things come and go, and all you're left with are the memories. And I think, to a certain extent, that's where my project is going now, because it is important to retain our history and to have someone available that can tell the story of what Hemisphere 68 was. And then to your comment earlier, every now and then I'll get a question from someone who works for the city. They're very wonderful people. Some of them are from here, some are from out of town originally. And they'll say, hey, I work for the transportation department or facilities maintenance department or something like that. And a question came across my desk about utilities or something like that near the Tower of the Americas. How were those fountains fed?
Mm-hmm.
Or some of the last things to say, well, was the sky ride at Hemisphere connected to the sky ride at
Yeah, so people are still curious.
So, I enjoy sharing the story and telling the story of Hemisphere, and I think in a sense it gives me a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
To be able to position to say, okay, this is what happened in today's terms 57 years ago. Not only just for how the city was redeveloped, like out at the airport, flew to San Antonio International prior to Hemisphere, the plane would pull up to the building and they would roll upstairs and you walk down the stairs. The Hemisphere allowed our airport to be redeveloped to introduce jet bridges that connect the plane to the building directly.
Wow, yeah.
So there's so many things that came out of that are just so fascinating. Even La Quinta Inn and Suites, which is now part of the Wyndham Hotel chains, but that was a Hemisphere original.
Yeah, yeah, right. And that, of course, that was the hope. It'd bring an economic boom, and it did.
It
Uh,
did.
and this is sort of an aside. I'm not going to put this in the article, but I did notice when I interviewed the Hemisphere Foundation, that new sort of group that runs the New Hemisphere.
Yes,
A-
H Park.
yeah. Anyway, she was a colonel or something. I don't know. Anyway, so I asked about, like, what about a museum for Hemisphere on the grounds? Surely you'd have something like that because I mean that was the original, locus of the whole thing. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It was almost as if that was sort of a pesky thing they'd have to do. And I just quite couldn't believe it because it just goes without saying that you'd have a small museum dedicated to Hemisphere in 1968, which was the whole damn beginning.
Yeah, until the story because that's where it comes from. I mean,
Yeah, she
because
didn't seem to think that was important.
yeah, but I know they're primarily focused. They just finished the successful opening of Civic Park Phase B, Phase
Right.
Two.
Right. No, I get
Yeah,
it. I get it.
yeah.
But
But that's primarily their charter, which goes back to 2009 when the city created that entity. So that's primarily what their focus is on.
right, it's the new hemisphere and not of old. But I just thought it would be nice. But no,
Yeah,
I understand new versus old. I get it. But I just thought it would be I just thought it'd be normal to do something like that. But anyway,
yeah.
mm,
But
you
I
know.
guess I will be honest. I guess in that part, they do send a lot of questions my way. So it's like we may or may not focus on something specifically
Hmm.
about the history, but we know this great guy who does. And
Good.
not only does he chronicle everything about the Hemisphere 68, but everything that they've been doing. I've been to almost every public workshop, like all the press releases.
I'm glad.
I keep everything,
Good.
even the little donor
So,
registration forms they send me every now and then in the mail. I keep all that. That's part of the archive.
oh wow. So would you say that your business or your hobby, I don't know how to phrase it, is growing? Is there more interest in hemisphere, and thus your company is growing, your collection?
Yes, it is. Like I said, because I mean, I get invited more often nowadays to tours or like I did a walking tour for OHP on Saturday because they held their homeowners fair there at the federal courthouse. So that was fun. I got to do a walking tour of that pavilion because to tell the 20 or some odd people that were there about the history of how it was the Confluence Theater and how the United States was involved in getting hemisphere off the ground and they participating with a pavilion.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's a lot of fun. It gets busy, So it gives again, like I said, it gives me a little bit of sense of purpose. But like I said, it started out just as a random interest, then turned into a hobby. But I guess you can just refer to it as a ongoing personal project. Like so I have a private collection of over 3,500 items from the hemisphere.
Wow.
Um, I have a website I launched back in 2011, which I still maintain and update.
Mm-hmm.
Around 2012 or so, I started expanding that to do oral history interviews
Mm-hmm.
with the folks that were involved with the fair. And that um, I had the privilege of interviewing some of the folks that are no longer with us, like Red McCombs, Tom Frost, Bill Sinkin,
Yeah.
one or two others.
Right.
People that visited the fair, people that worked the fair, kids whose parents worked there.
Yeah.
I know you and I have had a few conversations about your parents'
Yeah.
involvement. But yeah, and then I started doing social medias where I'll do some posting on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just as it's a small following, but it's a different following on each platform of people. And some of them they have an architectural history in Hemisphere, San Antonio. Some are World's Fair enthusiasts like myself. And some are architectural people, that either with an organization or one or two people who are grad students I've talked to that want to talk about how a World's Fair and urban planning
Yeah.
for so so
Well,
it's very fun. And like I said, it has brought it more to light in recent years. than when I was doing my early collecting in the
Yeah,
early
I think with the
2010s.
advent of all the people moving here, and San Antonio growing so much, it's not so moribund. So, what buildings do we have left that are of Hemisphere? The wood building, the courthouse. I'm glad they kept that. I don't know if that's a Hemisphere building or not.
Yes.
But what? Oh, is it?
Yes, it was the John Wood Federal Courthouse and then the adjoining Adrian Spears Training Center. That was built as the United States Pavilion Complex, being the exhibit hall, and obviously the courthouse was the Confluence Theater.
Okay, so
Uh,
that was the you because Chip said something about they were going to go do a tour, or you were doing a tour of the U.S. Pavilion, and I thought, oh, you meant the Texas and but the wood was the U.S. Pavilion then.
Correct, yeah, and that tour was the one I did on Saturday.
Oh, okay, that's a
Uh,
great building. I love that building.
and the neat thing is that it was actually deeded back to the city in a land swap deal where the city gave the General Services Administration some acreage off of Nueva Street where the old police headquarters was, or across
Yeah.
the old Kmart. In that area, which is now the San Antonio Emergency Services. Anyway, so Lake Flato Architects, which is the local firm, designed the new building, and that opened in 2023.
Okay.
And then, so we gave them that land, and in return, they gave us a 4.5-acre Hemisphere property back to the city.
Okay.
What included in that, what I've been told, is that included in the deed of transfer were many restrictions, including the big one that says that site can never be demolished.
Oh,
The
good,
Wood
good, good.
Courthouse and the Training Center.
Right, right, right. Any other buildings? Oh, of course, the tower, and then the grounds of the
Yes.
tower.
Well, right. Well, obviously we're losing the state of Texas Pavilion right now. But if you go from the ITC going back towards the west side of the site, you have the Women's Pavilion, which is just adjacent to um, the U.S. Pavilion.
Okay.
That's the yellow stone building with the different levels.
Okay.
Right next door to that is a little red brick building. That's the East Bend Kodak Pavilion.
Okay.
Um, Now, it's hard to describe. There's a rectangular building closer to the tower. It's where they have that upper level where that wings art feature is.
Mm.
There's a nondescript rectangular building that was built as the Gulf Insurance Pavilion.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And it was designed to host that pavilion. But it was also designed by larger scale restrooms, and it had a fountain in the center of that building because it was also intended to be a meeting place where you got folks that would go from various aspects of hemispheres. Okay, well, we'll meet in an hour, and we'll meet at the Gulf Insurance building because they have large seating areas.
Yeah. So is your opinion that they've done a decent job of commingling the old with the new, incorporating those old buildings? They're not threatened, are they?
No, the original houses that predate the World's Fair, those are all
Protected.
by the Conservation Society and other
Yeah.
agreements. So those aren't being demolished.
Yeah.
And all of those are being revitalized through H Park.
Yeah. Okay.
Where I think H Park puts them into what they call white box mode, which is
Mm-hmm.
basic renovations and stabilizations and
Mm-hmm.
preservation. And then the potential tenant would go in there and cover the cost, I believe, to do the fitting out into whatever that new business would be, like Lip Ice Cream, Commonwealth Coffee,
Yeah.
or the plant San Antonio, for example.
Okay.
And then there's a few other buildings. I don't know if you know where the old San Antonio Park Police building used to be. We have kitty corner from.
Yeah, I think it's a little white building.
Yeah, it's a little yellowish brick building. That was actually the building of RCA, Radio Corporation America. That was their pavilion.
Okay. So there's a substantial amount left. So they've done a sort of an okay job of preservation. But back to the Texas Pavilion. One feature I really liked we've discussed was that waterway down below. Do you know anything about that? Who designed that odd geometric path it had?
I'm not quite sure who designed it. I know it was kind of designed in the theme of the confluence of civilizations of America.
I see.
Overall
but it was special.
Yeah, because if you were facing the pavilion and you look down,
Yeah.
to your left you had all these various inlets or
Yeah,
outlets
it
for
was
water to
very, it
come out
was
of.
like a jigsaw puzzle, and it was very cool.
Yeah, and then as it went under the walkway, then it would come together, and on the right you'd have one big pool. And so that was the idea of the region being the great melting pot of all of the various ethnic groups that came to settle Texas.
Yeah, I think that in order to do something like what they've done, you have to be a little bit brutal yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
they I think they just got rid of it because, they didn't want any remnants of the, and I'm saying this in my own words, and I'm not writing this down, but just between you and me, I just don't, I think they got rid of it because they didn't want any remnant of the dirty deed that they've done. Like if they had saved that part of it, it would be sort of admitting that, yeah, we probably shouldn't be taking this whole thing down. But by, demolishing every little bit of it, there's nothing left to gain any sympathy in a way.
Yeah, so they were very quick about it, but it also looked at power at play, movers and shakers behind Project Marvel.
Yeah, I
But
think so. That's what everybody's saying. I was at a church group, they were saying it. Everybody talked to, they were saying it. I mean, everybody has this same opinion, that it was a dirty deal. And I'm not
yeah,
asking you to comment on that because that will be said elsewhere. But I think it's just part of this sort of attitude about, moving in and taking over the developers. You know.
yeah, but in a weird sense of irony, though, um, that was kind of the behind the scenes backstories about the World's Fair itself.
Yeah,
The site was
true.
acquired through eminent domain.
True,
Martin
true.
Richardson's documentary talks about the Todos family,
That's
which is
you're
actually
right.
owned. Yeah, they said
Yeah.
no, we won't sign, and they were forced out through eminent domain. So I
Yeah.
thought it was kind of the irony that now a hemisphere building is being removed in that same fashion. It's like, well,
That's a good point.
yeah, but at the same time, though, you can kind of see how that building had a lot of issues, and that site had a lot of issues after the fair for decades.
Yeah.
Um, being the first, when it was built for the fair, that location was almost smack dab in the middle because yeah, it was on the eastern end of the expo grounds, but just to the east of that was a 40-acre parking lot
Mhm.
for 4,500 cars to come
Yeah.
daily to
Yeah.
Hemisphere.
Yeah.
So it was right in the middle of that, and then on top of that, you had the Swiss Sky Ride that had the eastern terminus right there, so
Mhm.
people can either walk from the Foreign Nations area that way, or they could take the Swiss Sky Ride. So you had everybody coming to that point.
Yeah.
Um, and then after the fair, the exit strategy was UT San Antonio. But then when they signed that into law the following year in '69, and then the McDonough brothers came through with a donation of 600 acres in its main campus current location, well, that idea fell through.
Yeah.
And then you can also remember that KLRN Studios, or public television,
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
they
Mhm.
were there from '68. So the opening of Hemisphere, which actually their opening today of color TV because GE had donated everything. It's a little
Yeah.
sidebar. But yeah, so they were there until I think it was '93 or '94
Yeah.
when they moved out of there into their
Yeah.
current property,
Right.
Broadway Street.
Yeah. Um
So
but it was a gargantuan building, and it sure could house just almost anything, and so it was an interesting building, and so there's some resentment that we're always kissing ass to the Spurs, but I guess they're such big money makers, and
yeah,
we're so successful about 15 years ago. Maybe that's just the way life is. So
yeah.
I understand that, but I think it's closing a chapter with a bit of sorrow, and but that's as they say in America. That's progress. So
Yeah, so that's what I've been down there several times since the closing of the ITC in May of last year
yeah,
to really photograph that.
yeah.
And if you remember, they had that flag plaza just outside of the building before you go up to that
Oh, I
bridge.
know it very
Uh,
well.
yeah, that was the first section they were removing, and it was outside the fence area. There was no signs posted, no walking. So I went over there and I grabbed one of those rectangular granite tiles
Mm-hmm.
to
Good,
keep
well, good for
that
you.
for
Huh?
preservation
Why
for
not?
the
Why not?
area.
Like having a bit of the Berlin Wall. Do you have some photos that you might share?
Sure. What kind of photos are you
Well,
looking
it's
at?
for the
Photos?
it's for the magazine article. The article is about the demolition of the ITC, with a sympathetic view towards it. So any cool photos of the ITC that you might have in your collection, of course, we credit you as well. So that would be really
Yeah.
neat if you had some sort of sympathy photos.